Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 5 minutes.
In this week's Climate Curious, recorded live at TED, we're back with our old friend Marcelo Mena, the iconic methane destroyer. He's given us an update on how his methane hunting is going, sharing how he's working with communities to find the best methane reduction strategies, for example, with farmers at rice fields and at landfills. Let's hear more from Marcelo. Stay curious.
Awesome. Okay, so Marcelo, this is like, I don't know, how many times have you been on this podcast? Many times. Last time we talked to you was in New York.
Yes.
And I feel like since then, all I have been hearing about is methane.
Yeah, and it's, if things were going better, maybe we wouldn't be hearing so much about it. But the good thing is that there's a lot of momentum. So since we last spoke, the U.S. government and China have agreed bilaterally to work together on methane mitigation in California.
That feels like a huge deal, right?
Yes, we're very happy with that. And that opened up the door for the COP consensus that all countries should mitigate methane substantially by 2030. So there's a lot of momentum because of these things.
So for those who have, for some reason or another, not listened to our conversations with you before, can you give us like a 1-minute primer on methane?
Yes. So it's a greenhouse gas. It's the second most has contributed most to climate change. Around half of the warming we've experienced to date. It's short-lived, so if we turn off those emissions, its effective warming will be much faster. So it's like turning off the blowtorch that's on top of the simmer of climate change. So we have emissions going up, and it's a simmer. So if we have a Walking Dead scenario, we'll still have increasing temperature for a little while until CO2 decreases. In the case of methane, as soon as we shut off those emissions, it will be much faster cooling.
We love a Walking Dead reference here. Okay, so it feels like there's a lot of developments. One of the ones I've seen in the press is these satellites and this tracking. So explain to me, up until now, countries and companies, I guess, were self-reporting.
Yes.
Is that how it worked?
I mean, mostly the companies and countries report this based on emission factors that have never been measured. And now we have an increasing amount of satellite measurements. The IEA estimates that real emissions are probably twice as high as what is self-reported. And last March, a satellite that's publicly funded that's going to have available, it's actually going to make data publicly available, funded by philanthropy for the first time. So therefore, it won't be self-reporting anymore. It will be measurements by these growing sets of satellites.
Which is quite incredible because A, that we allowed people to self-report, but B, that we have this technology, now that we can do this. What is that going to mean? Like, what is the impact of that? How do you imagine, activists or organizations or countries will use this kind of data?
So the same reason that methane is higher at trapping heat makes it easier to detect by satellite, which is great. It sticks out like a sore thumb. You can see where the methane leak is occurring. So therefore, what was previously invisible today is going to be visible, and so therefore you could attack those leaks from landfills, from oil and gas extraction. So in a positive aspect, if you didn't know something was going on, you could actually tackle it. But if you did know and you're hiding it, you can't hide it anymore, which is really great. So that means, for example, the European Union, they wanted to see where the oil and gas are getting also has low emissions, but they don't want it to be self-reported. MethaneSat and the International Methane Emissions Observatory, which is a UN body, will be able to determine where the oil is coming from and what emissions rates exist. So therefore, the self-reporting doesn't count. It's what really is measured. So it'll provide integrity to all the declarations and leave the self-reporting. So if people
if countries want to sell their oil and gas into the EU, they're going to have to meet some requirements for it.
Exactly. And Korea also is planning to do the same thing. So will Japan. And most major importers. So around the corner, I believe there will be a lot of progress in the low oil and gas methane ways of doing things. Now, this shouldn't ever, there's no thing as clean oil.
Right.
We got to get rid of fossil fuels.
Of course.
But today we've got a poison in the dagger that's making climate change so much worse. We could
what a great analogy.
We got to get rid of that poison. Otherwise, we got to get rid of the dagger.
Yeah.
But the poison is making it so much worse.
Right. I know last time we talked about this, we talked about the different sources of methane, and one of them is also agriculture, right? You're doing some really exciting work on this. Can you update us on some of that work?
Yes. So first off, we got to work with farmers. Agricultural emissions are important, but farmers aren't our enemies. We need to collaborate with them.
Right.
So, and if you look at European politics, when you push too hard, you get backlash.
Yes, we've seen that.
And so therefore, we're working with farmers to having improved productivity while they reduce methane emissions, but also working to have research breakthroughs to lower emissions through vaccines, through feed additives, through genomics, overall better breeding, so emissions are reduced while income is increased.
Right.
Farmers are already facing the climate crisis. We shouldn't make their job any harder, and we need to work with them as we reduce emissions by 30% by 2030.
So, and I think this is a really amazing point, actually, and I think this kind of reflects some of what happens when you bring in a perspective of an organization based in the Global South as well, right? Is that we're not just ruthlessly trying to make everyone the enemy, but actually understanding that livelihoods are tied to this work and how do we make everyone's life better. Now, you've been in this role for
2 years.
2 years. Do you feel like, what trajectory do you feel like you're on with this work?
I'm so happy to know that we're in exponential trajectory. 70% of our staff is located in the Global South. We recently hit $85 million in funding already, most of it in the Global South. Our work with India, with China has been getting a lot of traction. We hope to have a lot of progress be shown at COP30 with our partnerships with Brazil. So I do think we are a global organization, has global reach, and keeping every other global organization on its toes, because everybody needs to be doing more on methane. And I think we have been increasing our reach thanks to the support of our funders.
So I'm curious to know, how do you feel that being both located in the Global South and having a staff that is made up of local people changes the way you do this work or impacts the way you do this work?
Because it has to do with methane through development. A lot of people from the global north see this as being about electric cars and solar panels, which are very important. But most of the emissions will grow in the global south. And so therefore, whatever we make progress on many other things will be erased if we have high emissions intensity in livestock and rice production, if we have the organic waste still rotting in landfills and increasing those emissions, if we have very inefficient oil and gas extraction that loses so much product and wasteful practices. So I think that's the feel of understanding that this is the Global South contribution to mitigation, but mitigation through development.
Right. I feel like this work seems like one of those areas in climate where we can actually feel a lot of optimism. Like we know what to do, and if we don't know what to do, doing the research. Do you feel optimistic with this work?
I do think we're optimistic because I do think I see the shine in the eyes of our partners understanding the opportunities. When I talk to a mayor or a city commissioner of a city in India, but they know that working together, we could actually reduce the exposure to bad odors to the communities nearby. And they see that this is something locally could be attained, and it's not abstract that will happen in the future, that we can help solve a problem that they have of landfills catching fire. It's about the opportunities that we see together. And I think that's gives me a lot of optimism, because we analyze, we think through what's in it for somebody to work with us. And we always bring opportunities and not demands.
Right.
No shaming, no moral high ground standing. It's about working together to tackle something to improve the lives of their own communities and also reduce poverty.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time,
Stay curious.